Hey, it's Nikki. I just wanted to pop in and invite you to the Sales Scripts for Increasing Influence Masterclass. It's happening in September. This course is for the person who loves language and is committed to improving their communication skills. We would love to have you in this course with us. I am going to be focusing on how to uncover and overcome objections and then what to say to move past those objections. I am going to be teaching techniques on how to speak with more clarity, how to prompt people to take action by the way that you frame your questions and the way you frame your suggestions, and so much more. We'd love to have you join. Now, to get more details and to register, and when you register using this link, it's going to save you $200 off the registration fee. So here's the link, yoursalesmaven.com/SEPT save 200. So it's like September save 200, but abbreviated for September. So SEPT save 200. yoursalesmaven.com/SEP save 200. Would love to have you in this course with us. It is fantastic content. It will absolutely change the way you communicate. I hope to see you there.
Do sales conversations make you feel awkward or pushy? It's time to ditch the outdated salesy strategies. Your guide, Nikki Rausch, will show you how to combine kindness with selling skills to meet your prospects where they are, and in the process, how to up-level your influence and income. Learn how to earn business easily and effortlessly. Here's Nikki.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Rausch. Today's episode is a part of the Mastering Excellence series. This is a concept that comes from my background in neurolinguistic programming, where we learn that there is a structure to excellence. And once you understand the structure of how somebody is getting exceptional results in a certain area of their life or business, you can then implement that structure so that you get similar results in your life and business. So today's episode, or today's guest, is Micheal Zipursky. So let me tell you a little bit about Micheal. He is the CEO of Consulting Success, where they specialize in helping entrepreneurial consultants grow profitable, scalable, and strategic consulting businesses. He has advised organizations like Financial Times, Dow Jones, RBC, and helped Panasonic launch new products into global markets. But more importantly, he's helped over 700 consultants from around the world in over 75 industries add 6 and 7 figures to their annual revenues. Over 38,000 consultants read his weekly consulting newsletter. Micheal is also the author of the Amazon bestseller, Act Now: How Successful Consultants Thrive During Chaos and Uncertainty, The Elite Consulting Mind, and Consulting Success, the book. Micheal, welcome to the show.
Hey, Nikki. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy to have you here. I just want to share a little, because I like to always share for the audience how we got connected. We first got connected through your podcast. I got to be a guest on your podcast. And the thing that struck me about you is you are such a giver. You are such an exceptional giver. And I was just so impressed with how gracious you were. And you made an introduction for me that was, like introduced me to somebody I'm a major fan of. And I'm just so grateful. So I'm so excited to have you on the show and get to feature you, because I think more people like you in the world, like we need more people like you. And I want people to know about you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. And I'm excited for whatever we're about to do together here. I know there's some mystery with this, so I'm excited for it.
It's always like when people say yes to this, I feel like they're like, they don't know what they're getting themselves into. And that's kind of the point behind where we're going with this today. So the topic that we're going to focus on now, there's a lot of things that I could be asking Micheal about, because he has that unconscious competence in many areas. But the one that I really wanted to dig into is the fact that you are an exceptional listener. And not everybody can say that about themselves. And I think all of us most of us who think of ourselves as lifelong learners, listening and really honing those skills is something that most of us want to improve on. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Great. Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to dive in. So my first question.
I was just listening to you there. I was just listening. So.
Because you're such a good listener, which makes you so likable. That's the other thing. I think people sometimes don't think about it, but people who are really good listeners, a lot of people really like them. Do you find that people are very drawn to you?
That's a hard question to answer. I think we certainly get to spend time with lots of great people. But yeah, I think people want to be heard. Yeah. They like to be listened to. And I like to listen. And I think that it's to be able to have, for me to be able to offer value or to offer perspective that will be helpful for somebody, I first need to listen. So that's what I do.
Which I'm sure makes you an exceptional consultant as well. So, all right. So if I was going to stand in for you for a day, I get to pretend to take on your persona. I get to be you. What do I have to do? Or how do I have to think when I'm meeting somebody and I really want to show up from that place of being an exceptional listener?
First is doing your research on that person, which doesn't necessarily require a lot of time, but having a sense of who that person is and what they've done is incredibly, I think, important because number one, it demonstrates interest. It distinguishes you from most people who may not spend the time to learn about that person. But also, in order to have a great conversation, if you have some of that background, there's so much more that you can draw on. So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be, it would depend whether it's a Zoom conversation or a face-to-face in-person conversation. But I think showing up, being happy, being positive. I'm a very optimistic person, and I'm always looking for the positive in somebody. I'm always looking for what is right before I look for what is wrong. And then back to kind of how you framed all this is around listening. So part of my background of building consulting businesses and helping many others do the same. One of the secrets, if you want to call it, although it's not a secret, I think it's well known, but one of the key traits of a successful consultant is the ability to ask deep, meaningful questions. If you know the right questions to ask, it can really help you to see things that others don't see. And that then allows you to help that person or help that organization. So asking questions is something that I would do and always like to do. And then I just shut up. I go quiet. I let the person talk. And that's what I would want you to do, would be to ask great questions and let the other person share their story or share what's top of mind for them or what they're looking for support or help with. And then be asking more questions and listening more and asking more questions and listening more until the point where you are at a place where you feel either you might want to offer some advice or suggestions or recommendations or an introduction to that person, or maybe there's nothing that you can offer them, but you try and direct them or ask them some questions so that they could get value themselves. So that the real thing that I always look for is how can I provide value to anybody that I'm speaking with or anybody that I'm interacting with. And I think, we could talk about where that comes from if you want. I could go off on a whole bunch of tangents here, Nikki. So you'll probably have to reel me in.
You're doing great.
That's what I'm looking for always in any interaction with somebody is I want to add value to them. I want to help them, to teach them. That deep down inside, that is kind of who I am, is where I get gratification and feel real fulfillment is when I can help somebody. And that can be in a business context, can be in a personal context, can be somebody who's lost walking around the city. Any way that I can help somebody, for me, gives me a lot of fulfillment and gratification.
Okay. So just for the audience's sake, I'm going to repeat back a few things here. So when you're showing up to these conversations, you're coming from a place of asking deep, meaningful questions and asking yourself, how can I provide and or add value to the person I'm speaking with? Is that right?
Yeah, it's part of it is curiosity. So I'm very interested in success, but success not only a financial perspective or sense of the word, but in any area. So if somebody is an athlete or a musician or an artist, I want to better understand how, similar to kind of like what you're doing right now, I want to understand the components or the elements that they go through or that they think about or that they consider that allow them to be successful. So my questions, my curiosity will come from that.
Is there one question in particular that stands out to you as it's a common question that you ask most people that the person maybe isn't asked often? Does that make sense, what I just said?
Yeah, it's a great question. An early one that I'll ask. So I'll get to your question, but one that I will often find out about is like, how long has this person been doing whatever it is that they're doing? Now, some of that you can actually find out by looking at their LinkedIn profile or some other public source of information. So if I've done that and if I've had access to that, I might reference something that, hey, I saw you've been doing this for X number of years. You used to work over here. Was that a hard transition to go from being an executive at this nonprofit or this Fortune 100 organization and becoming a consultant? Like, what was that transition like for you? Was your family supportive? So the questions they would depend on the situation, right? If I'm meeting an athlete, I might ask them about like, what's the most challenging part of their training, or how do they deal with the days where like they don't want to get out of bed and train because they're just feeling exhausted, or they're just wondering like, is it worth it anymore? I might come back to my experience of being an athlete in my earlier years. So I think the questions are really, there's no one question that I apply to every single situation. It depends on who that person is and what they're doing and what I might find interesting about that. But I think the big thing for me is that I look at questions in kind of two levels. You have the surface level questions, which are very general questions. And that's where I see most people spending the majority of their time when they're engaging in questions or conversation. And this is also true of consultants. But the real interesting stuff, the real value, the core, the emotional stuff, the feelings, the things that will get people to move and to take action and to really be excited is at the core. And so if you imagine an onion, that initial skin or layer is surface. And you can ask questions, you can have a conversation there, but it's not really going to be meaningful. It's not going to be memorable. You're not going to learn anything really interesting that's going to move the needle. But if you start asking deeper and deeper and deeper questions, you get to the core of that onion. That's where the questions you ask the person, they will remember them. And in many cases, nobody will have asked them those questions before. And so this is where they enjoy the conversation because you're learning, but they're also learning. They're learning through themselves speaking. They're thinking things and seeing things that they didn't before through your questions. And so now they appreciate you. And then not only they feel like, wow, this person's a really good listener, they also think like, wow, this person is very knowledgeable because they're asking me all these questions. And I'm finding that whole experience of having to think through how to respond to these questions very valuable.
Okay. I love this idea of peeling the onion, getting past the surface. And I want to comment, but also ask if this is true, because you gave us some examples of some questions and the way that you do this. And again, we are talking about listening, but that's how you have real conversations, right? As you ask questions and then you listen. But you talked about, there were two questions. One you framed as, I noticed that you transitioned from this company to this company. Was that hard to do? Like that was one of, I think, the questions. Maybe I'm sure you said it better than I just did. And then you also asked a question. You were giving an example of an athlete of like, what's been challenging for you? And that to me goes way below that surface level because you got to kind of dig to answer either of those questions. So the way you framed that, well, I guess I should ask you, does that resonate with you that you like that to me is getting below the surface?
100%. Yeah. There are times where I will ask initially a surface level question, but in most cases, I just find that those are like the same questions. Like, for example, surface level question, where are you from? Like everybody asks that, and that's okay to start a conversation.
Yeah.
But if you just keep it at that level, you're not going to really leave a mark. You're not going to be memorable, right? No one's going to go like, wow, I really enjoyed that conversation talking about just like, oh yeah, I came from Cleveland or, Vancouver or whatever. But if you go like, oh, okay, so you're from Vancouver. Well, how long, what's changed in the city over the years? I know that this, there's a big incident with this, like, were you around at that time? And, have you, like, so as you start going deeper and deeper, that's where the conversation becomes interesting for both parties.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Okay. That was fantastic. All right. So my next question is, what specifically would I have to do to behave like you when I am in that mode of being an exceptional listener? Like when I'm really listening, is there any particular behavior that you have? What is your behavior?
Okay. So first is eye contact, which with Zoom is sometimes hard because I'm looking at you on my screen, but my camera's above me. Mm-hmm. And so it's like hard to get the perfect, because if I look just at the camera, then I'm not seeing you. So the whole, Zoom thing's a little bit interesting. But I've always tried to be very present. And so eye contact is important. I know in certain cultures that can be a little bit more threatening. And so you have to have some considerations around that. But I really believe, and we probably all experienced this, where you go and you meet somebody at an event and you're talking to them, but their eyes keep going off to the side as they're talking to you. And you just feel like, is this person listening to me? Like, there's no presence. It feels like almost disrespectful, or they're just not engaged or interested. So I believe it's really important to maintain eye contact, to try and focus on that person. That kind of characteristic or behavior by itself can really distinguish you from others. So that's number one, is that eye contact and that presence. The second is slowing things down, is trying to just, again, ask a question and listen. And I got to admit, it's not always easy for me. I'm my wife and my family, like everyone will tell you this. I'm not known for my patience. From a long-term investment perspective or in certain business aspects, I have patience. But when it comes to just interactions or my day-to-day life, I'm not known for patience. I like to keep things moving, and I want to get right to the point. But if I'm talking to somebody, and I think this is also from the consulting perspective, a mistake that people often make is they will try and diagnose too quickly. So if you imagine you go to a doctor and, doctor, please help me. I'm not feeling really well. It would be malpractice for that doctor to jump in and say, oh, take this prescription. So, well, you haven't even asked me any questions. Like, you don't know what my issue is. So the best practice, right? The way, if we think about this as a doctor, a great doctor would ask you all kinds of questions. Where does it hurt? How long has it been hurting for? What does it feel like on a scale of 1 to 10, right? When does it typically happen? Have you changed your diet? But like, they're going to ask you all these questions. Only after asking these questions and listening, only then can they make an informed kind of diagnosis or offer a prescription, whether it's pills or not. But they can give you some advice or recommendations. And I think that's also true in a non-medical situation, that asking great questions and listening and waiting until the point where you actually have enough information to be able to provide a value. Because otherwise you risk, number one, coming across like you're not listening, or you don't care, or you're just the kind of person that wants to just give a whole bunch of stuff, but you're not really, it's not on point. It's not relevant. It's like, oh yeah, that person just thinks like they know everything because they're just telling me what to do, but they didn't really listen to me. They didn't really understand. So I think it's really important that as a behavior, you have enough patience and you slow things down to the point where the person that you're speaking with feels like they've been heard, that you've given enough silence and asked enough questions and spent enough time and been present enough so they actually feel like you've paid attention to them and that you've heard them and listened to them, so that then when you offer advice, or you even better ask, would it be okay if I made a recommendation? Would it be okay, all right with you, or would it be helpful if I suggested a few things or kind of share with you what I've seen others do in similar situations, now that becomes a much more effective way to offer that advice, and typically is much better received.
Perfect. So eye contact and slowing things down is definitely going to matter in that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. So my next question then is, what are your goals when it comes to showing up and being an exceptional listener?
Number one, I think I just want to show that I care. I want to show that I'm present, that I'm listening. I mean, these are all connected.
Yeah.
If I pull this towards one main goal, my goal is always to provide value to the person that I'm engaging with, and that value might be very different depending on who it is. But sometimes people, like, you just have a conversation. They're not necessarily looking for any kind of advice or help, and so there's nothing to be offered. But if I'm just interested in learning from that conversation, I mean, I'm hoping that through that conversation, there might be something that I can offer to that person. So I'm always trying to think about how can I give before getting, or just give, or just even learn and build a relationship. And I think that's where, again, in business, very often people they rush, they try and move too quickly. Their mindset is too transactional and not enough on relationships. And everything that I've done in my life and building businesses, locally as well as overseas, a lot of the success that I've had has come from relationships. It's almost all back to that. And so listening is a big part of that. But did that answer the question? Or
yeah, I think you gave, question was about goals. So this idea of, you care, you're being present, you're listening, you're providing value. And the idea is to give, to learn, to build relationships. So I'm going to ask you another question. There was something that you haven't commented on, but I just want to ask you about it. Because the way you're talking about, the way you're showing up in these conversations, that it's almost from a place of not having an agenda that's based on your own. I'm not saying this question very well, but it's almost like what I'm getting from this is that you don't have such an agenda that you're like, I'm just going to steamroll over this conversation because I already know where it's going to go and what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I think you use the word curiosity, which is probably one of my favorite words ever, is you show up from a place of curiosity, which then to me, but I'm asking you, does that then mean that you're not showing up with this big agenda?
It depends on the situation.
Okay.
So in some cases, I will have a very clear agenda and a very clear goal. It just depends on what's going on, right? So if it is a prospective client, I'll approach that differently than if it is just somebody that I meet at a party or a social gathering. It'll be different if I am at the airport and I want to try and move through the airport faster, or renting a car and there's a lineup, right? So sometimes there's situations where I have a very clear goal, which is, let's say, to get into the rental car and get out of, that place as quickly as possible. And so I'm going to think about how do I navigate that conversation, or what actions could I take right now that would get me in the car and out, out the door faster.
Right.
But if it's a prospective client conversation, it's going to be different. If it's an existing client conversation, it's going to be different. If it's just meeting somebody in a social gathering, that's also going to be very different. And so I'd say, if we're looking at the social gathering, there's absolutely no agenda. If it's an existing client, the goal is 100% on how can I add value, how can I help them based on where they are. If it's a prospective client, it's going to be very similar, but there'll be a lot more information kind of gathering at the beginning to better understand, is this somebody that we can help or not help, and how might we be able to serve them and add value for them, but without doing as much of the recommendations and so forth, because that's not the purpose of that initial conversation. So it depends. It's really what I would say is it kind of depends on the situation. But if it's a relationship building experience, then certainly less agenda coming into it.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. How do you know that you reach your goals when it comes to listening?
One would be the response of the person that I'm speaking to. So if it seems like, sometimes they'll just tell you, right? Like, wow, that was a really great question. It's like, wow, nobody's ever asked me that before. Or, yeah, today was so helpful. Thank you so much. Language like that just, tells you that you've done a good job. Other times you can just see it in people's eyes, or their reactions, or what they let you know. Like, yeah, I'd love to continue this conversation, or I'd love if we could meet again, or I'd love to introduce you to somebody. And likewise, you can tell when a conversation or interaction is not successful, or doesn't create the outcome that you want. In some cases, that's totally fine, right? Like, sometimes you're gonna have a conversation with somebody, and you're gonna leave that conversation going like, wow, I think we have very different values, and I don't know if I really want to spend time having a conversation with that person again. And that's okay too. Like, life is too short to try and please every single person or spend time with people that you're not going to enjoy spending time with. I think that's a mistake that sometimes people make. It's, like, I have to be equal and fit and fair, and and you end up kind of realizing that you're not spending time with the people. Like, there's a small group of people that you absolutely love, yet you're not spending as much time as you could with those people, and you're spending more time with people that you don't actually enjoy spending time with. So I think that's an important thing to really kind of redirect yourself. It's like, well, I have a limited amount of time here. Let's make sure that we're optimizing it to do the things that we love with the people that we love.
Perfect. I love that too. Okay. So how do you know that it's time? Like, if you're having a conversation or you're going to meet with a prospective client, for instance, how do you know it's time to really pay attention and listen?
Well, that's my default.
Okay.
For me, it's not a question of, I don't know when it is time. It's time all the time is the way that I look at it. Like, my default is I'm going to listen. I will always be the first one to listen. I'll probably be the first one to ask a question, or even if I'm not the first one to ask a question, I'll very quickly shift to the one. Like, I'm happy to share. If somebody's coming to me asking for information or help or whatever it might be, I will offer it. I will give it. But I will also very often, in response to a question, ask a question, because I want to better understand. I want to go deeper, so that if I'm going to provide advice, recommendations, help, guidance, introductions, whatever it is, I want to make sure that whatever I offer is going to be as relevant and valuable as possible. And quite often, I need to get more information from that person before I can respond in a thoughtful or accurate way.
Perfect. I love that it's your default, that you were so clear on that. Like, that's my default. Okay. Yeah, so the last question about this topic is, how do you know when it's time to stop? How do you know when it's time to stop listening?
Well, you're dead if you stop listening.
Okay.
Listening is something that I think, if you're talking about one interaction with somebody, then the answer might be different. Maybe you're having that conversation and you've asked lots of questions, and there's a very eerie silence, and they're not responding anymore. And so that might be now time for you to jump in and, offer to provide some thoughts or some advice. But in general, for me, listening is not something that you do sometimes, or just for a season or period of life. It's a source of life. It's a source of knowledge. So I think you continue listening for your whole life until you can't listen anymore.
I love that answer. So just for the audience's sake, and maybe this will be interesting to you, Micheal, but we'll see, is from doing this over the years with my background in neurolinguistic programming. And we had to do these master level projects where we essentially did this type of interview with multiple people on the same topic, and we were looking for structure. And I remember doing one of my master level projects was how to have a long lasting, loving relationship. And so we were asking, and so we would ask this question, like, how do you know when it's time to stop paying attention to your relationship? The people would do exactly what you just did, of like, it was almost like that's the dumbest question I've ever heard. Why would you ask me that? And that's when we knew we were talking to somebody who was a great example of having a long, loving, lasting relationship. Because they're like you did, you're dead. You're dead if you stop listening. Like, it was such like a great response. So I'm very tickled by your response to that question. And that's a really good indicator for you as the listener when you are really wanting to raise your level of skill in some area. That might be a question that you ask people who are exceptional at that particular skill. And if they give you these answers of like, it's never time to stop, that shows that unconscious competence of this is who I am and this is how I show up in the world. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. If you would indulge me for a few more minutes, I'm going to ask you some questions so our audience can get to know you just a little bit better, if that's all right.
Let's do it.
Okay. So here's my first question is, how do you celebrate your wins?
Depends on what the win is.
Okay.
Usually over a meal, good food, good drinks, good people.
Love it. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's not much better in life than having people that you care about around you, where you're enjoying, good food and drinks together.
I totally agree. What's one thing people would be surprised to learn about you?
I competed against an Olympic athlete. So back in my high school years, I was very competitive in track and field. I did shot put and discus and javelin. And one of the people, so I kind of reached city champion level, and then I went to provincial, like state, and would very often, get silver or bronze, but I never got gold at the state level. And the reason for that was because there was a guy by the name of Dylan Armstrong that I could never beat. And he was just like a giant of a teenager. I remember looking at him like, this is what a real life Hulk looks like. Anyways, long story short, he went on to win a bronze medal at the Beijing Olympics. So that's my claim to fame or not really fame, but anyways, I got to compete with somebody who ultimately went to the Olympics. And so that made me feel better. It's like, that's why I could never beat him. He was just, he went to the Olympics.
That's a fun story. That's fun to know that about you. I love it. All right. What's something exciting going on in your business right now?
We're continuing to grow. We're hiring new or more team members, more coaches. We're just rolling, like we're continuing to see a lot of growth, and it's fun because we're just building the team and putting more and more systems in place. So it's an exciting year with everything going on, and I think everyone in the team is very clear on what our goals are, our priorities are, and we really have come together nicely over these years to work through these things together and celebrate together as well.
I love it. And then last, how can people listening connect with you? What's a good way for them to connect with you?
So if you're interested in learning more about consulting, I suggest go to consultingsuccess.com, kind of home to everything that we do. Lots of free resources there. The Consulting Success podcast, which you'll see Nikki on, and a whole bunch of others as well. And then if you want to connect personally, LinkedIn is probably the best for me. If you're on a mobile device, just make sure that you click the little buttons there before sending a connection request, so you can put a little note in. Otherwise, it'll just send me the connection request, and I have no idea who you are, and I'm very likely to not accept it. But I love accepting. I will accept connection requests from anybody. Just let me know where you're coming from and who you are. So if you can put a little personal note in there, that's going to be helpful. I'd love to connect with anyone and help any way that I can.
Please connect with Micheal. There's a reason that I brought him on the podcast. I think he's amazing. And thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. And it's been fun to get to know you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nikki. I enjoyed this. It's different. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you think as you've been diagnosing my mind and how I operate.
All right. And for you as the listener, thank you so much for showing up. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support of the podcast. I'm so grateful. And if we haven't connected yet, let's do that. I tend to hang out on LinkedIn as well. You can find me there and on Instagram. Thank you for listening. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to Sales Maven. Visit us online at yoursalesmaven.com/maven for more resources to boost your confidence and skills.